Thank you, Madam Chairs, and to the Speaker. I am red hot mad about these cuts. This is a return to the Bloomberg era when we are flush with resources, and yet you are all insisting on cuts that are absolutely unnecessary. There were record investments in the city budget and the state budget to support the Department of Education, and yet you are insisting on cuts where we can least afford them. This budget passed with the implicit understanding that we would continue working together to address this issue, to rectify these cuts to our local schools. But as we look closer, and yet,
circle back to Councilmember Sanchez.
Councilmember Restler.
Thank you, Madam Chairs, and to the Speaker. I am red hot mad about these cuts. This is a return to the Bloomberg era when we are flush with resources, and yet you are all insisting on cuts that are absolutely unnecessary. There were record investments in the city budget and the state budget to support the Department of Education, and yet you are insisting on cuts where we can least afford them. This budget passed with the implicit understanding that we would continue working together to address this issue, to rectify these cuts to our local schools. But as we look closer at the DOE budget and what you all are imposing as the draconian cuts that you are imposing on our schools, it is far worse than I had anticipated. I raised these issues through the budget hearings, I raised these issues in meetings with the Chancellor, and I am absolutely livid at the extent of the cuts that we are experiencing. Do you know how many schools in New York City are experiencing cuts in the upcoming school year?
So,
how many schools?
So Councilmember, I would respectfully disagree with you about the return to a Bloomberg era. I think, as you know, in the Bloomberg era, we were not at 100%
I really appreciate,
funding
Lindsay,
levels.
You were a great public
now,
servant,
which
but
is
it's
a great
just a
victory
simple
that this
question.
council
How many
has
schools
actually
are
continued
experiencing
to
cuts?
invest in, and we appreciate the council's leadership in continuing to maintain.
It's
100%
1,182.
funding.
1,182 schools
I am
across the
aware
city
of the
are
enrollment
experiencing
loss.
cuts. And those cuts are dramatic. If you want to go up to Councilmember Aviles' district in Sunset Park, $22 million. Councilmember Brandon's district in Bay Ridge, $21 million. Councilmember Salamanca's district in the South Bronx, $20 million. Councilmember Stevens' district, $19 million. Councilmember Felice's district, $18 million. Across just those 5 districts, that's $100 million lost to our schools. These are some of the poorest communities in New York City, and we are starving them of resources when we can least afford it. You all said that, these were vacant positions that were not going to be replaced. That was disingenuous. Talk to the families at PS 34 who are losing art teachers, who are seeing larger class sizes, who are absolutely struggling. Talk to the families at PS 54 that are losing their bilingual program. Talk to the families at PS 261, one of the most sought after public schools in all of Brooklyn, that's experiencing a 16% cut. These cuts are not flesh wounds. These are cutting to the bone at schools where we can least afford it. These are our most vital public institutions, and these cuts are having dramatic impacts right now. Making adjustments in November has no bearing. It makes no difference to these schools. They will have already accessed all of these teachers. They will have already implemented these significant draconian cuts. Lastly, I want to ask you about the cuts in per pupil spending, which you all insisted even again in this presentation, that we are continuing to increase. But I read about in the New York Post that we are now experiencing a decline in per pupil spending. Is that accurate?
So, Councilmember, the New York Post article is referring to a publicly posted document on our website that describes the implementation of the Fair Student Funding Formula as it is currently designed.
So without any reduction in federal funding, putting that all aside, you all are reducing the per pupil spending that's going out to each of our schools anyway, which is contrary to what has been stated at hearing after hearing throughout this budget process and throughout the public statements by the DOE. Correct?
No, I would respectfully disagree. We are making an adjustment based on the decline in the year-over-year average teacher salary. This is how the Fair Student Funding Formula was designed 15 years ago. It is how we have implemented, it is how the department has implemented the Fair Student Funding Formula for the last 15 years. And it is something that the upcoming Fair Student Funding Working Group is welcome to discuss and make recommendations
We look
on
forward to working
changes.
with you on that. I have to say, when you add up these cuts across these 1,182 schools, just at the schools that are losing money, we're talking about in the range of $440, $450 million in cuts, significantly more than what the DOE and the mayor have been trying to say. These are dramatic, draconian, shameful, disgraceful cuts, and it's time for the Department of Education to look at the $1.1 billion in underspending, the $1.5 billion in reserves, the $8 billion in rainy day fund, and across the significant bloat in the DOE budget to fix the darn problem. We need results now. Thank you.